Was Tsar Nicholas II of Russia a moron or just plain incompetent? Were the peasants really free, or are they effectively still serfs? Was exile to Siberia really all that bad? These and other questions will be answered right after this. I am Professor Jerome Arkenberg and your host for History Waits for No One. I've been teaching a wide variety of history courses at colleges across this country for the past 30 years. And in this video, you'll discover the Tsarist Police State, Russification and ethnic minorities, the Peasantry and the Proletariat, the Intelligentsia and the Bourgeoisie, the privileges of the Russian Aristocracy, and the inadequacies of Tsar Nicholas II, which, all put together, left Russia in a ferment on the eve of revolution. But first, make sure to click like, share, subscribe, and that little bell thingy, so I continue to bring you more great videos just like this one. Due to the problems and disruptions of industrialization, the poverty of the peasantry, and the agitation for either reform or outright revolution on the part of the middle and educated classes, Russia, on the eve of revolution, was, as I said, in continual ferment. The Okhrana, the secret police, tried to keep a lid on this through a network of spies and informers and strict controls on schools, colleges, newspapers, and judges. Even travel from one town to another inside the country, even a town that was only 20 miles away, required you to have both a passport and police permission to do so.From 1881, the Okhrana instituted pogroms designed to divert attention from Russia's ills by blaming its Jewish population. And so its agents spread anti-Semitic propaganda, such as the infamous Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which purports to be the Jewish master plan for world takeover. And too many people still believe that to this day, but it was written by agents of the Okhrana. And thus they use this to incite popular violence, to drive Jews out and keep the people's attention away from Russia's very serious socioeconomic problems. Making it even worse was Russification, a policy to force all non-Russians to adopt the customs, language, and religion of Russia, which simply inflamed tensions in Finland, Poland, Ukraine, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and all of Russian Central Asia. Then there was Tsar Nicholas II himself, who had limited intelligence, filled with insecurity, low self-esteem, and extreme aversion to confrontation. He had a habit, unfortunately, of agreeing with anyone who talked to him just so he can get away. Once, in a private meeting with his cousin, true story, with his cousin, Germany's Kaiser Wilhelm II, he agreed to give up essentially half of Western Russia to Germany. So he would give up Poland, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Finland, Belarus, Ukraine to Germany, just so he can get away from talking to his cousin. Of course, later, Count Sergei Witt, his chief minister, then was forced to repudiate this deal. All of this made the Tsar the wrong man in the wrong time and wrong place. Just like King Charles I of England was the wrong man and the wrong time and wrong place for the English Revolution, and as King Louis XVI of France was the wrong man at the wrong time and wrong place for the French Revolution. If any of these had been effective, competent, even mediocre leaders, the revolution could have been avoided in all three places. But because they were not, of course, somehow, this is what is required for a revolution. Plus, the Tsar had a bigoted and stubborn wife, Alexandra, who refused any limits on Tsarist power, much like King Charles I's wife, Henrietta Maria, or Louis XVI, Marie Antoinette. Again, each one achieved the ultimate, being the queen or Tsarina, and did not want any smidgen of power taken away from their children, their son. And all of this simply made matters worse, as it had in England in the 17th century, in France in the 18th century. However, even with his own clear limitations, Tsar Nicholas II realized, though many, if not most, of the upper classes did not, that the winds of change were clearly blowing towards a constitutional monarchy, much as one had in, say, Great Britain, for which many in Russia, especially the educated and mercantile classes, were impatient to see. Now, while the Russian Empire, as you see here on this map, stretched from Germany to the Pacific Ocean and from the Arctic to Persia, it remained a largely rural, even feudal society. Only a handful of industrial centers existed. These were Moscow, Kiev, St. Petersburg, Kharkov, Odessa, Rostov, Baku, Warsaw, Łódź, and Riga. And the number of factory and shop workers was actually quite small. Despite all this, nonetheless, from 1887 onwards, the Russian economy did grow by leaps and bounds, but not from any initiative by private citizens, by, say, titans of industry, or inventors, or entrepreneurs, even small-scale shop owners. Why? Solely from government policies favoring industry and financial modernization that they might militarily keep up with the great powers of Western Europe, even if the peasantry, some 80% of the population, failed to prosper. In the countryside, wooden plows were still the norm. Farming techniques were primitive. Peasants, unable to afford barns, slept in their huts with their animals, and all lived just barely above subsistence. There was very little difference from medieval conditions. In the villages, peasants still held land communally, with fields divided into narrow strips tilled separately by various families, much like back in medieval Western Europe. But here, all the land was redistributed periodically by the mir, which is the name for the village councils, to ensure that each household had an equal share, which sounds very egalitarian. Certainly would keep the peace, but for those who had some ambition to make their life better, they were unable to accumulate more land, and which would hence give them more capital, a capital to invest, say, in a small business, even being a weaver's loom at home. So essentially, the policy kept anyone from getting ahead. Further, even more, while the serfs had legally been emancipated in 1861, this was meaningless because they, through the village mir, owed their former owners compensation for the loss of their labor through 49 annual installments of redemption payments. So, for example, if it hadn't been for, in America, the Civil War and the 13th Amendment, let's say just freed the slaves. Well, who will work the fields of the former owners? Well, let's make the former slaves pay these redemption payments for 50 years, which, of course, will keep them in their place and effectively keep them slaves. Or, as in Russia, effectively keep them serfs. Now, leaving the village permanently to seek work elsewhere, or even to emigrate. Permanently to leave was legally very, very difficult. But leaving temporarily was easy. So half of peasant households had Otkhodniki, or seasonal laborers working in mines, fields, or factories, who would return home only at harvest or planting to help their families, but also they were required to return home twice a year, otherwise be declared a fugitive runaway. Now, Karl Marx had said that peasants could never be revolutionary, that you could not go from his stage of feudalism directly to the stage of the socialist workers' paradise without first going through a capitalist stage. Capitalist meaning an industrial stage, much like Britain had done, or France or Germany. But Russia's Otkhodniki, these industrial workers who still had a peasant mentality, were in fact militant and revolutionary, which meant their demands for better wages and working conditions unfortunately quickly became political, both because the Tsarist state owned large stakes in all industrial concerns. So any attempt at better wages or a strike is essentially an attack against the state itself, and hence, because of the state being so involved, all strikes and unions were prohibited, which instead of in many ways letting off steam, simply began to let it build up. So, due to the meaninglessness of emancipation, overbearing landlords, the continuing problems of redemption payments, and mere redistribution of land, plus the exposure of these Okhrana to Western liberal ideas from working in the factories and the mines run by Western managers, because Russians didn't have the skills to do so yet. And most of these Western managers were from Russia's allies, the French and British. The peasants, too, were primed for revolution. Now, after Russia's disastrous defeat in the Crimean War, in an effort to catch up with the West, the Tsarist state set up an educational system based on Western models, which soon produced an educated elite, an intelligentsia of writers, lawyers, engineers, and others, whose education led to their opposition to both Tsarist autocracy, but also, oddly enough, industrialization as part of the Romantic Revolt. And out of guilt of their privileged status, Imagining a golden past that never was, it led many to the embrace of some kind of socialism. This intelligentsia rather quickly moved from passive to active resistance, attracting supporters from all levels and classes of Russian society. In response, the Tsarist state went to great lengths to suppress all kinds of political activity. All political parties were prohibited, and anybody joining one, founding one, or trying to join one were either sent into exile in Siberia or, more rarely, shot and killed. We tend to think of mass slaughter in these Siberian camps under Tsarist states, but from 1825 to 1917, there are only 4,000 so executed, which is far, far less, really a small drop in a giant bucket when we get to the Soviet state. Repression, though, simply made matters worse. And by the late 1870s, many of these activists, the intelligentsia, and the rising middle class, if you want to call it that in Russia, turned to terrorist killings of police officers and Tsarist officials, including Tsar Alexandra II himself, who was killed in a bombing in 1881, which so affected his son, Tsar Alexander III, that Alexander cracked down on the activities of this intelligentsia and the merchant middle class even more, making the whole situation even more explosive. So, let me know what you liked about this video and what other historical topics or subjects you'd like to see in future videos. Be sure to click like, share, and especially subscribe, as it will help me bring you more great videos. And don't forget to click on that little bell thingy so you'll know when the next History Waits for No One video is posted. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the past.